Top 10 most hated Golden Age celebrities of all time. Fame doesn't guarantee adoration. In fact, for some of Hollywood's biggest stars, their legacies are defined not by their achievements, but by the darkness they left behind. While we often romanticize Hollywood's golden age as a time of glamour and enchantment, the reality behind the silver screen was far more complex. For every beloved icon, there was a figure whose reputation collapsed under the weight of their own behavior, revelations from those they harmed, or shifting cultural values that exposed their true nature. The most fascinating thing about these hated celebrities isn't just that they were disliked, it's that many were simultaneously adored by millions, explained a veteran Hollywood historian. These weren't just polarizing figures, these were stars who maintained perfect public images, while those who actually knew them lived in fear or anguish. What makes these cases particularly compelling is how thoroughly the studio system worked to conceal their true natures. Entire publicity departments existed not just to promote these stars, but to actively hide behavior that would have shocked their adoring public, from parental abuse and rampant misogyny to political betrayal and even violence. The gap between image and reality was deliberately manufactured, noted a former studio publicist. When you understand that Joan Crawford's perfectly curated, devoted mother persona was being created by the same studio that was covering up incidents that would later fill Mommy Dearest, you realize just how effectively the public was being manipulated. Most disturbing is how many of these celebrities maintained their carefully crafted images until death, only to have the truth emerge later through memoirs, interviews, and historical reassessment. The contrast between the adoration they received in life and the contempt that followed them in death reveals how effectively Hollywood's machinery could shield even its most problematic stars from consequences. Today, we're exposing the 10 most genuinely reviled figures from Hollywood's golden age, stars whose legacies have been permanently tarnished, not by changing tastes or fading relevance, but by the revelation of who they truly were behind the glamorous facade the public was sold. From the beloved crooner whose wholesome image concealed shocking parental abuse, to the brilliant director who betrayed his closest friends to save his own career, these stories reveal the dark reality that often lurked behind Hollywood's brightest lights. But first, we begin with perhaps the most dramatic fall from grace in Hollywood history. An Oscar-winning actress whose posthumous reputation was destroyed by revelations so shocking they transformed her from respected star to symbol of parental cruelty.
Was in this film, and he's done 87 films. Did you know
Yes,
that?
80 of which we haven't seen over here.
Joan Crawford, Hollywood's monstrous mother. In the public imagination of the 1940s and 50s, Joan Crawford embodied glamour, determination, and reinvention. Rising from poverty to become one of Hollywood's most enduring stars, she won an Academy Award for Mildred Pierce and maintained a career spanning decades when most actresses were discarded after their youth faded. This carefully cultivated image concealed a private reality so disturbing it would eventually overshadow her entire professional legacy. The reason? The Mommy Dearest legacy, noted a film historian specializing in Hollywood's golden age. Crawford's reputation wasn't just damaged after her death, it was completely obliterated by her daughter Christina's 1978 memoir, Mommy Dearest, which portrayed Joan not as the devoted mother her publicity suggested, but as an abusive, alcoholic tyrant. The contrast between Crawford's public and private personas could hardly have been more dramatic. While studio publicity emphasized her devotion to her 4 adopted children, with carefully staged Christmas photos and Mother of the Year awards, Christina's memoir described midnight beatings, bizarre punishments, and psychological torture. Why they are hated? While she was a difficult diva on set, feuding famously with Bette Davis, her reputation was permanently destroyed posthumously by her daughter Christina's memoir, Mommy Dearest, explained the historian. It painted her as an abusive, alcoholic tyrant, turning her into a caricature of Hollywood villainy. Christina's allegations included Crawford dragging her from bed in the middle of the night to scrub floors for missed cleaning spots, beating her with coat hangers, cutting off her hair in a rage, and forcing her to shower in scalding water. The book portrayed a woman whose obsessive control and narcissistic rage created a household ruled by fear and unpredictability. When Mommy Dearest was adapted into a film starring Faye Dunaway in 1981, Crawford's transformation from respected actress to cultural shorthand for maternal abuse was complete. Dunaway's over-the-top performance, particularly the infamous no wire hangers scene, cemented Crawford in the public imagination as a monstrous caricature. The film's campy tone actually did Crawford a disservice in terms of being taken seriously as an abuser, observed the historian. By making her behavior seem so outlandish, it allowed some to dismiss the allegations as exaggeration, when in fact multiple sources have corroborated Christina's accounts of genuine abuse. Crawford's two youngest children, twins Cindy and Kathy, disputed Christina's characterization of their mother, creating competing narratives about the actress's private behavior. This family division has further complicated Crawford's legacy, with some suggesting Christina's account reflected her specific experience rather than Crawford's overall parenting. The contested nature of the allegations hasn't restored Crawford's reputation, noted the historian. Instead, it's created a permanent cloud of suspicion and debate that overshadows discussion of her actual work. When Joan Crawford's name comes up today, Mommy Dearest is inevitably mentioned before any of her films. What makes Crawford's case particularly revealing about Golden Age Hollywood is how effectively the studio system manufactured public personas that bore no resemblance to reality. MGM and later Warner Brothers constructed Crawford's image as a devoted mother, knowing full well that the reality was far different. Studio fixers would clean up after Crawford's explosive episodes, publicity departments would arrange Mother of the Year photos, and the press would dutifully report the version of Crawford the studios wanted presented, explained the historian. This wasn't occasional image management, but a constant, deliberate fiction maintained over decades. The dramatic collapse of Crawford's reputation after her death serves as a stark reminder of the gap between Hollywood's manufactured images and the often disturbing realities they concealed, a pattern that would repeat with our next subject, whose wholesome public persona masked a shocking pattern of parental abuse.
16 or 17, I used to go down and work in the local theater whenever any of the great touring shows came through town, like Jolson or The Follies.
Bing Crosby, The White Christmas Nightmare. For generations of Americans, Bing Crosby's mellow baritone defined Christmas itself. His recording of White Christmas remains the best-selling single of all time, while films like Going My Way and The Bells of St. Mary's presented Crosby as the ultimate gentle, wise father figure, relaxed, patient, and fundamentally decent. Behind this soothing public persona, however, apparently lurked a man whose treatment of his own children revealed a disturbing disconnect between the father America adored and the father his sons actually experienced. The reason, the abusive father, stated a cultural historian who has studied Crosby's impact on American entertainment. The gap between Crosby's public image and private behavior was exposed in his son Gary's 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way, which described a childhood dominated by emotional coldness and systematic physical abuse. Gary Crosby's account of life with his famous father described regular beatings, emotional neglect, and a household ruled by rigid discipline and fear. According to Gary, Bing required his sons to weigh in weekly, with any weight gain resulting in humiliation and beatings with a leather-covered cane or belt fitted with metal weights. Publicly, he was the chill, pipe-smoking crooner. Privately, according to his son Gary's memoir, Going My Own Way, he was a cold, corporal punishment-obsessed father who beat his children, explained the historian. The contrast between his white Christmas image and his private cruelty shocked the world. What made these revelations particularly devastating to Crosby's legacy was how thoroughly they contradicted the persona that had made him beloved. The gentle priest from Going My Way, the wise father in his many films, the relaxed family man from his television specials, all these carefully constructed images were undermined by accounts of a man who regularly beat his children bloody for minor infractions. The shock wasn't just that Crosby was allegedly abusive, it was that his entire public persona was built on qualities that were apparently absent in his actual parenting, observed the historian. It wasn't a case of a known tough guy also being tough at home, it was America's gentle father figure allegedly being a monster behind closed doors. While Gary's brothers initially disputed some of his characterizations, his younger brother Lindsay later confirmed many of the allegations. Before his death in 1989, Lindsay reported receiving regular beatings from his father and described Bing as a brutal man and really a monster. The revelations about Crosby's private behavior forced a reevaluation not just of the man, but of an entire era's approach to parenting and discipline. What Crosby allegedly inflicted on his children wasn't merely strict parenting by mid-century standards, but behavior that crossed into abuse by any reasonable definition. Crosby's case illustrates how thoroughly Hollywood could construct personas that bore no relationship to reality, explained the historian. The man millions welcomed into their homes as the ultimate father figure was, according to his own children, incapable of providing the basic emotional warmth and safety that fatherhood requires. While Crosby's reputation never recovered from these revelations, his holiday recordings continue to be played each Christmas, creating an uncomfortable dissonance between the voice that symbolizes family warmth for many Americans and the troubling allegations about how Crosby treated his own family. This pattern of beloved public figures harboring dark private realities continues with our next subject, a brilliantly talented director whose personal betrayal of friends and colleagues permanently tarnished his artistic legacy.
Dire quelque chose, j'ai senti le besoin de plus d'espace, de place pour faire des digressions.
Elia Kazan, Hollywood's ultimate betrayer. Few directors in Hollywood history matched Elia Kazan's ability to draw raw, powerful performances from actors. Films like On the Waterfront, A Streetcar Named Desire, and East of Eden showcased his extraordinary talent for psychological realism and emotional intensity, earning him a place among cinema's most significant artists. Yet Kazan's artistic achievements would forever be overshadowed by a single decision, one that transformed him from respected director to industry pariah and symbol of betrayal during one of America's darkest political periods. The reason? The Hollywood rat, noted a film historian specializing in the McCarthy era. Kazan was a brilliant director on the waterfront, but he became a pariah among his peers for testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, in 1952. He named names of suspected communists, including his friends, to save his own career, leading to decades of bitterness. Kazan's testimony before HUAC represented a pivotal moment in Hollywood's blacklist era. Having briefly been a Communist Party member in the 1930s, Kazan was called to testify about his knowledge of communist influence in the entertainment industry. After initially refusing to identify others, he changed course in a second appearance, naming 8 former group theater colleagues as Communist Party members. Kazan's decision to name names wasn't just seen as political compliance but as personal betrayal, explained the historian. These weren't anonymous figures but friends and collaborators with whom he had worked closely. His willingness to potentially destroy their careers to protect his own struck many as an unforgivable betrayal of both friendship and artistic principles. The consequences for those Kazan named were severe and immediate. Many found themselves blacklisted, unable to work in the industry for years or even decades. Careers were derailed, livelihoods destroyed, and lives upended, all while Kazan's own directorial career continued largely uninterrupted. What made Kazan's actions particularly galling to many was his subsequent refusal to express regret. Not only did he never apologize for naming names, but he took out a full-page advertisement in the New York Times defending his decision. Later, he would essentially justify his actions in his autobiography, maintaining that he had made the right choice under the circumstances. When he won an honorary Oscar in 1999, half the audience refused to clap, noted the historian. That moment, with some audience members standing in ovation while others sat with crossed arms, perfectly captured Hollywood's permanent divide over Kazan. Even 47 years after his testimony, the wounds remained raw enough that many industry figures couldn't bring themselves to applaud his artistic achievements. The 1999 Oscar ceremony brought the Kazan controversy back into public discourse, with prominent directors and actors taking sides, either defending his lifetime artistic achievements or condemning his actions during the blacklist era. The divisive response to his honorary award demonstrated how thoroughly his HUAC testimony had defined his legacy, overshadowing even his most celebrated films. Kazan's case represents perhaps the most dramatic example of how personal actions can permanently taint artistic legacy, observed the historian. His films remain masterpieces of American cinema, but they cannot be discussed without the asterisk of his testimony and its devastating impact on others' lives. What makes Kazan's story particularly complex is how his most acclaimed film, On the Waterfront, can be interpreted as a defense of informing. The film's famous I Could Have Been a Contender scene, where Marlon Brando's character confronts his brother for selling him out, is mirrored by a later scene where the same character ultimately decides to testify against the corrupt Union leadership, suggesting a narrative justification for Kazan's own decision to name names. The film reads almost as Kazan's attempt to justify his testimony, explained the historian. This adds another layer to his legacy, not just the act of naming names, but his subsequent artistic effort to present such actions as ultimately heroic rather than cowardly. While some have argued for separating Kazan's art from his actions, the enduring bitterness toward him demonstrates how some choices permanently alter how an artist's work is perceived. His case represents not just political controversy, but a fundamental question about personal loyalty versus self-preservation that continues to divide opinions decades after the blacklist era ended. While Kazan's fall from grace came through a single controversial decision, our next subject's reputation suffered from a more complex combination of personal behavior and political positions that transformed him from beloved icon to problematic figure.
And so forth. And it was more spontaneous.
Charlie Chaplin, the fallen tramp. Few figures in entertainment history achieved the universal adoration that Charlie Chaplin enjoyed at his peak. His little tramp character transcended language, culture, and national boundaries, making him perhaps the world's first truly global celebrity. His artistic genius as actor, director, writer, and composer established him as cinema's first complete auteur. Yet this same man, once beloved worldwide, would find himself effectively exiled from America, his reputation tarnished by a combination of personal scandals and political suspicions that transformed him from cultural hero to controversial figure. The reason? Politics and teenagers, stated a film historian who has studied Chaplin's complex legacy. In the 1940s and 50s, Chaplin went from the most loved man in the world to one of the most hated in America. The public turned on him due to a paternity suit, his marriages to teenage girls — Una O'Neill was 18, he was 54, and accusations of being a communist sympathizer, which eventually led to his exile from the U.S. Chaplin's fall from American grace occurred through a series of controversies that combined to create a perfect storm of public backlash. His personal life generated scandal through multiple marriages to very young women, including 16-year-old Mildred Harris when he was 29 and 16-year-old Lita Gray when he was 35, creating a pattern that would be viewed as clearly predatory by modern standards. Chaplin's relationships with teenage girls created increasing public discomfort, explained the historian. While such age gaps weren't entirely uncommon in early Hollywood, the pattern of specifically pursuing very young women, combined with accusations of controlling and abusive behavior within these relationships, gradually transformed public perception of Chaplin from charming romantic to problematic predator. A 1943 paternity suit filed by actress Joan Barry further damaged Chaplin's reputation. Though blood tests eventually proved Chaplin was not the father of Barry's child, these tests were inadmissible in court at the time, and he was ordered to pay child support, creating public perception that he had abandoned his responsibilities despite scientific evidence to the contrary. These personal controversies coincided with growing political suspicion of Chaplin, whose films often featured social commentary, critical of capitalism, and supportive of humanist values that, in the intensifying Cold War atmosphere, were increasingly viewed as potentially communist-aligned. Chaplin never actually joined the Communist Party, but his refusal to explicitly deny communist sympathies during an era of intense anti-communist fervor made him a target, noted the historian. Films like Modern Times and The Great Dictator, which criticized aspects of capitalism and fascism respectively, were retroactively viewed through a more suspicious political lens as Cold War tensions increased. The combination of personal scandals and political suspicions culminated in 1952 when Attorney General James McGranary revoked Chaplin's re-entry permit while he was traveling abroad. Rather than fight to return to the United States, where he had lived for 40 years without seeking citizenship, Chaplin chose to remain in Europe, establishing his home in Switzerland. Chaplin's effective exile from America marked a stunning reversal for someone who had once been the country's most beloved entertainer, observed the historian. The man whose films had defined American cinema for a generation found himself unwelcome in the country where he had created his most important work. Though Chaplin would eventually return to the United States in 1972 to accept an honorary Academy Award, his reputation never fully recovered from the combination of personal scandals and political suspicions that had transformed him from universal beloved to controversial figure. Chaplin's case demonstrates how quickly public opinion can turn even against seemingly untouchable cultural icons, explained the historian. His artistic contributions remain undeniable, but his personal choices, particularly regarding very young women, have created a permanently complicated legacy that continues to prompt debate about separating art from artist. While Chaplin's fall from grace involved both personal and political dimensions, our next subject earned his place among Hollywood's most despised figures purely through his treatment of colleagues, creating a reputation for rudeness and cruelty that overshadowed his considerable talent.
There's Dr. Doolittle.
Man can talk to the animals. It's a miracle. In a year from now, I guarantee.
Rex Harrison, Hollywood's cruelest gentleman. On screen, Rex Harrison embodied sophisticated charm. As Professor Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady and the title character in Dr. Dolittle, he presented a particular brand of British refinement that made him an international star and Academy Award winner. Behind the cameras, however, Harrison reportedly displayed behavior so consistently awful that he earned a reputation as perhaps the most unpleasant star to work with in Hollywood history, a distinction in an industry hardly known for gentle personalities. The reason, the king of rudeness, noted an entertainment journalist who has interviewed numerous actors from Hollywood's golden age. Known as Sexy Rexy to fans, he was known as a nightmare to co-stars. He was reportedly cruel to Audrey Hepburn during My Fair Lady and was widely considered arrogant, temperamental, and misogynistic by those who worked with him. Harrison's treatment of co-stars, particularly women, generated legendary stories of casual cruelty and deliberate humiliation. His behavior toward Audrey Hepburn during the filming of My Fair Lady became particularly notorious, with Harrison reportedly belittling her lack of formal musical training and treating her with open contempt throughout production. Harrison was known for reducing female co-stars to tears, explained the journalist. Julie Andrews, who had played Eliza Doolittle on Broadway opposite Harrison, described him as the rudest man I ever worked with, a description echoed by virtually everyone who shared a set with him, from Audrey Hepburn to Samantha Eggar. What distinguished Harrison's unpleasantness from typical Hollywood difficult behavior was both its consistency and apparent deliberateness. This wasn't stress-induced outbursts or occasional temperamental moments, but a seemingly systematic approach to treating colleagues with disdain, particularly those with less power or status than himself. Harrison's behavior wasn't just rude, but hierarchical, observed the journalist. He treated stars differently than bit players, men differently than women, directors differently than crew members. This calculated distribution of contempt revealed a person who wasn't simply difficult, but actively cruel, based on his assessment of others' importance. Stories of Harrison's behavior extend beyond professional rudeness to shocking personal conduct. He allegedly urinated in co-stars' dressing rooms when displeased, referred to Samantha Eggar as the common little bitch, and treated crew members as servants beneath his notice. His personal life reflected similar patterns, with multiple marriages marked by allegations of emotional abuse and infidelity. His reputation for treating romantic partners poorly matched his professional reputation for colleague mistreatment, suggesting a consistent character rather than mere on-set temperament. What's particularly notable about Harrison is how little his appalling behavior affected his career, noted the journalist. Unlike others on this list who faced career consequences for their actions, Harrison continued receiving prestigious roles and awards despite his widely known reputation. His difficult genius was tolerated in ways that would be inconceivable in today's industry. Harrison's case demonstrates how thoroughly bad behavior could be excused in Golden Age Hollywood when the perpetrator possessed sufficient talent and box office appeal. Studios, directors, and co-stars endured his treatment because his performances delivered commercially and critically, a calculation that prioritized product over human dignity. While Harrison's reputation for cruelty was well established during his lifetime, our next subject's difficult on-set behavior has undergone significant reassessment in recent years, transforming a beloved musical icon into a more complicated and sometimes reviled figure. Gene Kelly, the smiling perfectionist's dark side. Gene Kelly's athletic grace and infectious smile made him the embodiment of Hollywood musical joy. Films like Singin' in the Rain, An American in Paris, and On the Town showcased his remarkable talent while creating an image of Kelly as the ultimate positive, energetic entertainer. This upbeat public persona masked a demanding perfectionism that, according to many who worked with him, crossed into genuine cruelty, particularly toward the female dancers and actresses expected to meet his exacting standards. The reason, the on-set tyrant, stated a dance historian who has studied Hollywood musicals. While respected for his talent, Kelly was a perfectionist who drove his co-stars to the breaking point. Debbie Reynolds famously stated that he worked her so hard on Singin' in the Rain that her feet bled and she had to be carried to her dressing room. He was known for being harsh and unyielding in his pursuit of perfection. Reynolds' experience on Singin' in the Rain has become the most famous example of Kelly's demanding methods. Just 19 years old and with no formal dance training, Reynolds was expected to keep pace with Kelly and Donald O'Connor, both experienced dancers. Kelly showed her little patience or understanding despite her inexperience. I rehearsed for 3 months, 7 days a week. My feet were bleeding from all the dancing, and I couldn't stop crying from fatigue, Reynolds later recalled. Gene Kelly was brilliant, but he was an SOB to work for. He came to rehearsals and criticized everything I did. He made me dance until my feet were raw. What makes Kelly's treatment of Reynolds particularly troubling is the power dynamic involved, as both her co-star and director Kelly had complete control over Reynolds' performance and career prospects. His decision to push her to physical breakdown wasn't just artistic perfectionism, but an abuse of this dual power. Kelly's behavior toward Reynolds and other female co-stars reflects a broader pattern in how male directors, co-stars, treated young actresses, observed the historian. What's often romanticized as pushing for greatness looks very different when considering the age gaps, power differentials, and physical toll extracted primarily from young women. Other Kelly co-stars reported similar experiences. Sid Charisse described him as a very demanding perfectionist who would make dancers repeat exhausting numbers dozens of times until they achieved precisely what he envisioned. Leslie Caron noted that working with Kelly was very strenuous and that he drove me as hard as he drove himself. What complicates Kelly's legacy is that his perfectionism produced undeniably brilliant results, explained the historian. Singin' in the Rain is consistently ranked among the greatest musicals ever made, and Reynolds' performance, achieved through Kelly's punishing methods, is extraordinary. This creates uncomfortable questions about whether the ends justified the means. Modern reassessment of Kelly's methods reflects changing understandings of workplace conduct and power dynamics. Behavior once excused as artistic perfectionism is increasingly recognized as workplace bullying, with the physical and emotional toll on performers considered alongside the quality of the final product. Kelly's reputation has undergone significant revision as former co-stars have spoken more candidly about their experiences and as cultural standards around workplace treatment have evolved, noted the historian. The smiling, joyful dancer on screen has been increasingly revealed as someone whose pursuit of perfection could be genuinely cruel to those with less power. While Kelly's controversial reputation stems primarily from his professional methods, our next subject's place among Hollywood's most hated figures comes from personal views that have aged particularly poorly in light of evolving social values.
Okay, Red, now you got your laugh. How about me getting one? I've never been on one of these comedy programs before.
You will.
John Wayne, the problematic American icon. For generations, John Wayne embodied a particular ideal of American masculinity. His performances in countless westerns and war films established him as the quintessential tough, principled hero, straightforward, patriotic, and uncompromising. This carefully cultivated image has undergone dramatic reassessment in recent decades as Wayne's personal views on race, politics, and indigenous peoples have been re-examined through a contemporary lens, transforming a once universally beloved American icon into a deeply controversial and, for many, actively reviled figure. The reason? Polarizing politics and racism, stated a film historian specializing in Western cinema. Wayne has always been a political lightning rod. His legacy took a massive hit recently when a 1971 Playboy interview resurfaced, where he stated, "I believe in white supremacy." He is also disliked for his treatment of Sacheen Littlefeather at the 1973 Oscars, where he reportedly had to be restrained from dragging her off stage. The 1971 Playboy interview represents a particularly damaging element of Wayne's legacy. In it, he made explicitly racist statements about black Americans. "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility," and expressed views about Native Americans that justified their displacement. "I don't feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from them. There were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves." Wayne's statements in that interview weren't subtle or ambiguous, explained the historian. They expressed explicitly racist views that can't be easily dismissed as products of their time or misinterpreted. The clarity of these statements makes it particularly difficult to separate the man from his artistic legacy. Wayne's politics were never secret. He was an outspoken conservative and anti-communist throughout his career. However, the specific nature of his racial views received less attention during his lifetime than his broader political positions. The rediscovery and recirculation of the Playboy interview in recent years has forced a more comprehensive reassessment of his personal beliefs. What makes Wayne's case particularly complex is how thoroughly his screen persona became intertwined with American identity itself, observed the historian. For many Americans, Wayne didn't just play heroes. He represented a particular vision of American virtue and strength. Having his explicitly racist views highlighted forces' uncomfortable questions about that vision and what it excluded. The incident with Sachin Littlefeather at the 1973 Academy Awards has gained renewed attention as part of this reassessment. When Littlefeather appeared on behalf of Marlon Brando to decline his Best Actor award in protest of Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans, Wayne reportedly had to be restrained by security from physically removing her from the stage, an incident that takes on added significance in light of his published comments about indigenous peoples. Wayne's apparent rage at Littlefeather's brief, dignified statement about Native American representation demonstrates how personally he took challenges to his vision of America and Hollywood, explained the historian. The incident reveals not just political disagreement, but a visceral reaction to having marginalized voices given platform in what he likely viewed as his industry. Debates about Wayne's legacy have intensified in recent years, with controversies over airports, streets, and buildings named in his honor. In 2020, the Democratic Party of Orange County, California, passed a resolution calling for John Wayne Airport to be renamed due to Wayne's white supremacist, anti-LGBT, and anti-indigenous views. Wayne's transformation from universally beloved American icon to controversial and often reviled figure represents one of the most dramatic legacy reversals in Hollywood history, noted the historian. As American society has become more conscious of systemic racism and indigenous rights, Wayne's explicit statements on these issues have rendered his heroic screen persona increasingly problematic for many viewers. Wayne's case demonstrates how thoroughly cultural reassessment can transform public perception of once beloved figures, particularly when their own words reveal views fundamentally at odds with evolving social values. While his films remain important historical documents, the man himself has become a divisive figure whose legacy continues generating intense debate. While Wayne's controversial reputation stems from his personal views, our next subject earned her place among Hollywood's most despised figures through her professional actions, using her position to damage careers and lives while enforcing her own moral and political standards on the industry.
Is that all right?
All right, Angel. It's perfect.
Well, I must...
Hedda Hopper, Hollywood's feared gossip queen. Though never a movie star herself, Hedda Hopper wielded more power in Hollywood than many A-list celebrities. As America's most influential gossip columnist from the 1930s through the 1960s, she could make or break careers with a few carefully chosen words, a power she used not just to report on Hollywood, but to actively shape it according to her own moral and political views. For the stars who found themselves on the wrong side of Hopper's favor, she wasn't just a journalist, but an active threat to their livelihoods and reputations. The Reason, the gossip villain, noted a media historian specializing in Hollywood's golden age, not an actress, but a failed actress turned columnist who held the power to destroy careers. She used her column to out people, shame them, and enforce her own moral political code. She was feared and loathed by almost every actor in the industry. Hopper's transformation from unsuccessful actress to powerful columnist came after years of minor film roles failed to launch a significant screen career. Rather than leaving Hollywood, she reinvented herself as a gossip columnist, using her insider connections and knowledge of the industry's secrets to build a readership that eventually reached over 35 million Americans through her syndicated column. Hopper didn't just report gossip, she weaponized it, explained the historian. She understood that Hollywood careers depended on carefully managed public images, and she used this knowledge to enforce her conservative political views and traditional moral standards on an industry she often viewed as corrupt and immoral. Her power stemmed from both what she published and what she threatened to publish. Stars, studios, and publicists lived in fear of Hopper revealing secrets that could destroy careers, from closeted sexuality to political affiliations, extramarital affairs, to undisclosed pregnancies. This fear gave her extraordinary influence over both individual careers and broader industry practices. Hopper played a particularly destructive role during Hollywood's blacklist era, noted the historian. She enthusiastically supported the House Un-American Activities Committee's investigations into supposed communist influence in Hollywood, using her column to pressure the industry to blacklist suspected communist sympathizers and publicly praising those who name names. Her feuds with individual stars became legendary within the industry. Her decades-long battle with actress Katharine Hepburn included constant criticism of Hepburn's independent lifestyle and fashion choices. When Hepburn once spotted Hopper at a restaurant wearing one of her signature flamboyant hats, she reportedly walked over and said, "I thought I smelled garbage. I see I was right." Hopper's willingness to out closeted gay actors made her particularly feared within Hollywood's LGBTQ community. At a time when public revelation of homosexuality meant certain career destruction, Hopper wielded this knowledge as a threat, sometimes publishing thinly veiled blind items suggesting a star's sexuality while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. Hopper used homophobia as a weapon, observed the historian. She would imply that certain actors were gay as a way to damage their careers or pressure them into providing other gossip as a trade for her silence. This practice caused incalculable anxiety and fear among LGBTQ performers already living in a hostile societal environment. What distinguished Hopper from other gossip columnists was her explicitly political agenda. She used her column to advance her conservative Republican views, attack liberal figures in Hollywood, and pressure the industry to conform to her vision of American values. This politicization of gossip transformed her from mere reporter to active culture warrior, using celebrity secrets as ammunition. While other notable gossip columnists like Luella Parsons focused primarily on entertainment value, Hopper had a more explicit political and moral agenda, explained the historian. She saw herself not just as reporting on Hollywood, but as policing it, a self-appointed guardian against what she viewed as the industry's moral corruption and potential communist influence. Hopper's power eventually declined in the 1960s as societal norms shifted and celebrity culture became less controlled by studio publicity departments. Her death in 1966 marked the end of an era when a single columnist could wield such extraordinary influence over an entire industry through the strategic deployment of gossip and innuendo. Hopper's legacy is that of Hollywood's most feared non-filmmaker, noted the historian. The loathing she inspired among those she targeted remains evident decades after her death, with many Golden Age survivors describing her in their memoirs as a malevolent force who caused genuine harm through her willingness to destroy careers to advance her own agenda. While Hopper's reputation for malice stemmed from her professional actions, our next subject earned his place among Hollywood's most disliked figures through a combination of professional arrogance and personal views that ultimately alienated even his most devoted fans.
The man that got the Legion of Honor first was Shorty, Napoleon. He got it first, okay? Now, he is a great... He never had an act.
Jerry Lewis, from beloved clown to bitter recluse. For generations of Americans and Europeans, especially French audiences, Jerry Lewis represented the pinnacle of physical comedy. His rubber-faced expressions, manic energy, and childlike persona created a distinctive comedic style that made him one of Hollywood's most successful performers, both with Dean Martin and in his solo career. This enormous popularity, however, eventually gave way to a very different public image, that of an embittered, arrogant figure whose dismissive treatment of others and controversial statements transformed him from beloved entertainer to industry pariah. The reason? arrogance, and misogyny, stated an entertainment journalist who covered Lewis's later career. Lewis had a reputation for being incredibly difficult, moody, and arrogant. In his later years, he made several controversial comments dismissing female comedians. "I don't like any female comedians," which cemented a reputation as a bitter, out-of-touch figure. Lewis's difficult reputation developed gradually throughout his career, but became increasingly apparent after his split from Dean Martin in 1956. As a solo performer with complete creative control, Lewis reportedly became increasingly demanding and temperamental on sets, treating crew members with contempt and expecting total deference from collaborators. Lewis developed a god complex that made him nearly impossible to work with, explained the journalist. He referred to himself as the total filmmaker and treated anyone who questioned his decisions as inferior. This behavior extended beyond professional settings to interviews, public appearances, and charity events, contexts where his arrogance became increasingly visible to the public. This arrogance manifested most notoriously in Lewis's infamous interviews, where his contempt for journalists asking questions he deemed beneath him became a recurring spectacle. He would regularly insult interviewers, refuse to answer questions, or abruptly end conversations, behavior that transformed his public image from comedic genius to entitled celebrity. What accelerated Lewis's reputation decline were his comments about female comedians, noted the journalist. In a 1998 appearance at the U.S. Comedy Arts Festival, Lewis stated that watching women do comedy sets me back a bit, and that he didn't like any female comedians, not even Lucille Ball. He doubled down on these views in subsequent years, telling an interviewer in 2013 that women couldn't be funny in the same way as men. These sexist remarks came at a time when female comedians like Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, and many others were achieving unprecedented success, making Lewis appear not just misogynistic, but dramatically out of touch with contemporary comedy. His refusal to acknowledge his error or modify his position when given opportunities to clarify further damaged his reputation. Lewis's annual Muscular Dystrophy Association telethon, which he hosted from 1966 to 2010, added another complicated dimension to his legacy. While raising over $2.6 billion for the cause, Lewis's approach to disability became increasingly criticized by disability rights activists who objected to his portrayal of people with muscular dystrophy as objects of pity rather than full human beings deserving dignity and agency. Lewis's telethon work created a strange contradiction in his public image, observed the journalist. He was simultaneously America's most visible advocate for muscular dystrophy research, and a figure whose approach to disability was increasingly viewed as outdated and problematic by the very community he claimed to serve. The MDA ultimately removed Lewis as telethon host in 2011, releasing a terse statement thanking him for his service, but providing no reason for the split. Lewis never publicly discussed his departure, but reports suggested he was bitter about being removed from the role he had held for 45 years. Lewis's declining years saw him increasingly isolated from the entertainment mainstream, with his legendary status acknowledged, but his current relevance severely diminished. His death in 2017 prompted reassessment of his comedic contributions, alongside recognition of the personal flaws that had damaged his reputation in his later decades. Lewis's transformation from beloved clown to reviled figure represents one of Hollywood's most dramatic falls from public grace, concluded the journalist. What makes his case particularly notable is that, unlike some on this list, his reputation decline occurred largely through his own public statements and behavior rather than through posthumous revelations or changing societal standards. While Lewis's reputation declined through his own public behavior, our final subject's place among Hollywood's most hated figures stems from a combination of known volatility and rumors of darker misconduct, creating a complex legacy for an entertainer whose talent was matched by his capacity for cruelty.
Well, if it were a certain someone I met at your house, I would take her for a walk in the park.
Frank Sinatra, the chairman of Intimidation. Few entertainers achieved the cultural impact of Frank Sinatra. As the defining male vocalist of the 20th century, Oscar-winning actor and cultural icon, Sinatra's artistic contributions remain unquestioned. His influence on American popular music, performance style, and celebrity culture continues decades after his death. This extraordinary talent, however, coexisted with a volatile temperament and troubling associations that have created a permanently complicated legacy, one where artistic brilliance cannot be separated from behavior that ranged from merely difficult to genuinely disturbing. The reason, the bully, noted a music historian who has studied Sinatra's career and influence. Sinatra had a volatile temper. He famously physically fought with journalists, had deep ties to the mob, and could be cruel to women, including his tumultuous marriage to Mia Farrow. He was known for snapping his fingers to get what he wanted and blacklisting people who crossed him. Sinatra's volcanic temper was no industry secret. Throughout his career, he engaged in physical altercations with journalists, photographers, and others he believed had disrespected him. These weren't mere heated exchanges, but actual violent incidents, throwing punches, breaking cameras, and using his entourage to intimidate those who criticized or questioned him. Sinatra's violence toward the press wasn't occasional, but systematic, explained the historian. He viewed critical coverage not as part of the price of fame, but as personal insults requiring retaliation. This created an environment where many journalists feared covering him honestly, knowing physical confrontation might result. This intimidating approach extended to his professional relationships, where Sinatra was known for demanding absolute deference and loyalty. Those who failed to meet his expectations, whether fellow performers, studio executives, or venue managers, could find themselves permanently excluded from his orbit and potentially subject to industry blacklisting through his extensive connections. Sinatra had a famous line, "Don't ever say no to me," noted the historian. This wasn't hyperbole, but a genuine operating principle. He expected immediate compliance with his demands and reacted with disproportionate anger when refused. This created a culture of fear around him, where even minor disagreements could result in career-damaging retaliation. His relationships with women displayed similarly troubling patterns. His marriages, particularly to actresses Ava Gardner and Mia Farrow, were characterized by jealousy, possessiveness, and volatility. Farrow later described feeling controlled and diminished during their relationship, with Sinatra's expectations that she abandon her own career to suit his needs, ultimately contributing to their divorce. Perhaps most controversial were Sinatra's well-documented connections to organized crime figures. From his early career performing in mob-controlled venues to his later friendships with known mafia leaders, Sinatra maintained relationships with criminal organizations that raised serious questions about his personal and professional judgment. Sinatra's mob ties weren't peripheral to his identity, but integral to it, observed the historian. These weren't distant associations, but close personal friendships with figures like Sam Giancana and Carlo Gambino. While the exact nature of these relationships remains debated, their existence is undeniable and forms a troubling aspect of his legacy. What makes Sinatra's case particularly complex is the genuine artistic brilliance that coexisted with these troubling behaviors. His vocal performances on albums like In the Wee Small Hours and Only the Lonely represent the pinnacle of popular singing, while his acting in films like From Here to Eternity and The Manchurian Candidate demonstrated genuine dramatic talent. The challenge with Sinatra is reconciling the transcendent artist with the deeply flawed man, explained the historian. His voice provided emotional solace to millions, even while his personal behavior caused real harm to those who experienced his temper, controlling tendencies, and retaliatory actions firsthand. Sinatra's legacy continues generating debate, with admirers emphasizing his artistic contributions and charitable work, while critics point to his volatile behavior, misogyny, and mob connections. This ongoing conversation reflects the genuinely complicated nature of his impact, a man whose talent and temperament were equally outsized, leaving a legacy that resists simple characterization. Sinatra embodied contradictions that make simple moral assessment impossible, concluded the historian. He could be extraordinarily generous to friends in need while viciously vengeful toward those who crossed him. He created art of timeless beauty while behaving in ways that caused genuine harm. This complexity ensures his place among Hollywood's most divisive figures rather than its most straightforwardly reviled.